thy infinite wisdom and providential goodness, has appointed the offices of rulers and councils for the welfare of society and the just government of man. We beseech thee to behold with thy abundant favor us, thy servants, whom thou hast been pleased to call to the performance of such important tasks and trust in this our island. Let thy blessing descend upon us here in assembly gathered, and grant that we may, as in thy presence, treat and consider all matters that shall come under our deliberations in so just and faithful a manner as to promote the good and glory, honor, and to advance the good of those whose interests thou hast committed to our charge. All which we seek in thy name and for the sake of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Please be seated.
Motion for the approval of the order paper as circulated.
Mr. President, good morning, and I rise to move a motion for the approval of the order paper as circulated.
Mr. President, I rise to second the motion.
The question is that the approval for the order paper as circulated be approved. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
Messages from the Deputy Governor General. Announcements by the President.
I wish to note that this morning I had a call from the Senator, Honorable Hazel Brandy Williams, which indicates that she is not able to attend Parliament today because she is not feeling well. We hope that she gets better soon and that she is able to join us at our next sitting.
Papers to be laid. Statements by ministers.
Mr. President, good morning. I rise to make a very brief statement. I will be brief. Of course, we know that very shortly we'll be back here for the budget presentation, when I would expect to be much more in depth in terms of what has been taking place in my ministry over the past year and in terms of our way forward. But I just want to report very briefly, Mr. President, just on three areas. And I will start with community development. Of course, we are getting very close to the Christmas season, Mr. President, and I'm sure those of us who would have been passing through Charlestown would realize that in the heart of the city, right there at the Memorial Square, it's a buzz of activity, and we are getting prepared for our, what I call, our national tree lighting, and that will be taking place on Wednesday the 4th of December. I want to applaud the efforts of the Department of Community Development for this, organizing this activity. And of course, we know that there will be a number of other tree lightings across the island during the course of the month of December. So I want to take this opportunity now, Mr. President, to invite all of Nevis to Charlestown on the evening of Wednesday the 4th of December. As much cricket at the ETW Park as possible. And for the second time, the second year in succession, the department would have organized a tape ball tournament sponsored generously by the Development Bank of St. Kitts and Nevis. And I'm happy to report that that tournament would have come to a close 2 weeks ago at the park, and it was won by the Rollins team. And I want to take this opportunity, Mr. President, to heartily congratulate the Rollins team, because they did what no team did last year when the tournament was introduced, and they would have played undefeated throughout the entire tournament. Undefeated. And of course, I really want to say this because over the past years, we've heard a lot of bad reports coming out of Rollins Village. And when there is bad, the reports are coming. And so when there is good, we need to speak about the good as well. The good thing about it as well, Mr. President, a lot of the folks on this Rollins team were youngsters, very young men. And so they would have banded themselves together, come to the ETW Park, and would have shone very brightly. And so I want to congratulate the Rollins team heartily. I want to say as well that for the 2 years that this tournament has been running, the championship has gone to my constituency. Last year, for the inauguration, it was won by the Empire Sports Club. I was happy this year to loan a couple of my players to the Rollins team, and they brought back the gold to St. George's again. And so I want to congratulate St. George's. I want to... but they're representing Rollins. I want to commend very highly once again the Rollins team. I want them to keep up the great works, and let us continue to have good news coming out of Rollins. The final thing I want to talk about, Mr. President, is the work that is taking place in the heart of Gingerland. And of course, I'm sure a lot of persons, I believe everybody in Nevis would be aware of what is taking place in the heart of Gingerland, right there at Market Shop. And once you traverse the island's main road, you must see some work taking place there. So I want to say that the work on the festival village there in Gingerland is practically almost complete. And I must say, Mr. President, that I'm exceptionally pleased with the workmanship. I'm exceptionally pleased with the pace of the work that took place there. And we are delighted that we will be ready for next Thursday, the 28th of November. Let me say that clearly, because persons have doubt. Let me watch the camera and say it clearly. We will be ready for Thursday, the 28th of November, for the official opening and naming of that facility, as well as the official opening of the Gingerama Festival. I want to thank my cabinet colleagues for approving this project. And of course, I want to give them the assurance and to give the whole of Nevis the assurance that the investment made there in Gingerland was an excellent one, and the money was very well spent. I want to say here that the money that was spent there in Gingerland is not for the Gingerama Festival alone. It is a multi-purpose facility, and I'm very confident, all of us are very confident, that it will be heavily utilized. That facility that was built there was in no intention to compete with any other facility on the island of Nevis, but a way of complementing. And so I'm inviting all of Nevis to come to Gingerland on Thursday, the 28th of November at 6 p.m. for the grand opening and the naming of the facility, twinned with the official opening of the Gingerama Festival. And let me just briefly outline what the rest of the festival looks like. On Friday, the 29th of November, we have what is called the Ginger Fete, and that is being organized by some young folks in Gingerland. I commend them. I tip my hat to them. And we're inviting all to come out on that night as well. On the Saturday, the 30th of November, we are expecting folks to leave the Ginger Fete and move straight to Juve. And then on the evening of Saturday the 30th, we have the Miss Gingerama pageant. We have 4 lovely contestants. And then we climax on Sunday the 1st of December. We have cricket at the Hard Times playing field at about 2. And then we move back to the festival village in the evening for the Miss Gingerette pageant. And so, Mr. President, I want to invite you, all of us who are here, and all of us in Nevis to come and be a part of what we have planned for the opening of the facility on the 28th of November and the entire Gingerama Festival going until the 1st of December. Mr. President, thank you for this opportunity. May it please you.
Mr. President, I rise and seek leave to make very brief comments on a few matters that I think is important to our people. Mr. President, it relates to two recent conferences which I had the privilege to attend. The first, Mr. President, was the Caribbean Water and Wastewater Association, CWWA, 28th Annual Conference, which was held here in the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis, Mr. President, from the 14th to the 18th of October. Mr. President, this was a very important conference as it relates to water and wastewater matters. We recognize that we continue to face significant challenges as it regards to our water sector. And at this conference, Mr. President, we saw participants from throughout the region, from donor agencies and from funding agencies that dealt with the matter of water and wastewater in a very serious way, Mr. President. At that conference, Mr. President, we signed the Declaration of Bastille. And this declaration, Mr. President, outlined a number of very important initiatives that we feel would move the water and wastewater sector in a much more resilient direction. Mr. President, I just want to read from that document, with your permission, that Declaration of Bastille, just two of those declarations, Mr. President. We assure the citizens that appropriate and timely action is being taken to address water, wastewater, and sanitation challenges and build a climate-resilient water sector. Mr. President, that is a clear indication that the Caribbean is taking serious steps in ensuring that we not only put ourselves in a position where we can provide additional water to our general populace, but also to ensure that we deal with the matter of climate change and climate resilience in the wastewater and water sector. We also declare, Mr. President, that there is a greater commitment to greater collaboration with regional and international organizations and private sector institutions, as well as with individual member states and the CWWA in advancing water security throughout the Caribbean. Mr. President, that also is a clear indication that the persons who are responsible for water throughout the region will seek at all points to ensure that there is water security throughout our Caribbean region. And we know, Mr. President, without water, everything will be affected. Our economies, our health, our livelihood, and our very survival. As we say, water is life. So, Mr. President, that was a very important conference. And we recognize, Mr. President, that the region continues to face challenges as it regards to financing in water infrastructure. And we believe that while we are seeking external sources of financing, I believe that we have an untapped source of internal finances for the water and wastewater sector, which is something that we need to look at very seriously. The second conference which I attended, Mr. President, was the International Conference and Expo on Sargassum, or seaweed as we call it, in Guadeloupe from the 23rd to the 26th of October. And Mr. President, I believe that all of us throughout the region recognize the continuous nuisance that this seaweed is causing on our coastline. This, too, Mr. President, is also a challenge that is interfering with our various economies. We have seen the challenges that it has posed in places like Barbados. Places like Mexico, Mr. President, are also expressing their concern over this phenomenon. And right here in St. Nevis, we continue to see this phenomenon being affecting our coastline. And out of this conference, Mr. President, we were able to make a declaration. And one of the interesting things within that declaration was that there would be some preferential treatment, Mr. President, for small island states as it regards to financing in combating this phenomenon. We are hoping, Mr. President, that within the first half of next year, there will be a donor conference as it regards to this sargassum phenomenon, where we hope that we will have this conference and solicit donor agencies to inject some significant funding to deal with research and how we can harvest this phenomenon for the use of persons in the Caribbean. And, Mr. President, I am hoping that once that funding is available, that we in these small island states will get our fair share. And those persons who are affected, the fishermen, those coastal communities, those organizations that deal with environmental issues, and our tourism sector would benefit from those funding, Mr. President. Mr. President, I thought that it was important to place on record those bits of information as it regards to those two very important conferences. And we hope that going forward we can ensure our water safety and our water security and also build resilience in the system. And also we can deal with this coastal phenomenon that is affecting our very livelihood in our Caribbean island. May it please you, Mr. President.
Personal explanations. Introduction of bills and first reading.
Good morning, Mr. President. I rise to move a motion to introduce and have read a first time the Nevis Business Corporation Amendment Bill 2019.
Mr. President, I rise to second the motion.
The question is that the bill shortly entitled the Nevis Business Corporation Amendment Bill 2019 be read a first time. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
A bill to amend the Nevis Business Corporation Ordinance Number 1 of 2017 and for matters related thereto are connected therewith.
The bill has been read the first time.
I rise again, Mr. President, to move that the bill shortly entitled the Nevis Limited Liability Company Amendment Bill 2019 be read a first time.
Mr. President, I rise to second the motion.
Question is that the bill shortly entitled the Nevis Limited Liability Company Amendment Bill 2019 be read the first time. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. The bill has been read the first time.
A bill to amend the Nevis Limited Liability Company Ordinance Number 2 of 2017 and for matters related thereto or connected therewith.
Sorry, the bill has been read the first time.
Public business, bill second and third readings. When was it? The 8th of October. The 8th of October.
Mr. President, I rise to lead the debate and ensuing discussion, I hope, on the bill that is shortly entitled Integrity in Public Life Amendment Bill 2019, which I'm advised had its first reading in this Honorable House on the 8th of October 2019. Mr. President, I believe the House and the island would be well aware that during the election campaign of 2017, that this CCM, then the party in contention in that election, advised that if it were elected, it would seek with some alacrity to implement and operationalize integrity in public life legislation. We set about, having been elected, to fulfill that commitment that we had made. And Mr. President, in short order, we were able to appoint the commission, the Integrity Commission, comprising as it is one individual appointed by Her Honor, the Deputy Governor General, on my advice as the Premier of Nevis, one individual appointed by Her Honor, the Deputy Governor General, on the advice of the now sole member of the opposition, the Honorable Joseph Parry, and one member being the chairperson appointed by Her Honor, the Governor General, in her own deliberate judgment, the chairperson by law having to be someone who is a lawyer and having over 10 years experience at the bar. And as a consequence, I believe, the commission was set up, established, comprising Mr. Newton, Mr. Tyrrell, and Mr. Keynes as chair. And so Mr. Sidney Newton, Mr. Alfred Tyrrell, and Mr. Ricardo Keynes as chair. And that commission has set about its work, Mr. President. We, however, recognize that it was not only just to appoint persons to the commission, but that we also had the need to provide the necessary infrastructure. And so we were able to rent premises above Ram's Supermarket. We were able to outfit those premises in a manner with furniture, technology, and the like, which was befitting such an important office. And we were able to provide the commission with the necessary staff that it asked for. The result, therefore, was that we had put in place not only the commissioners, but also the infrastructure around them, office infrastructure, to allow them to function. The commission has met with me. I assume they would also have met with others. And it is quite clear to me that the Integrity Commission is serious about the business that they've been asked to conduct. I should advise the Honorable House that as part and parcel of our discussions with the commissioners, that the government has also allocated certain sums to the commissioners by way of stipend for their work. And in addition, we have discussed that for this budgetary cycle, the Commission will put forward its budget and budgetary requirements for the new year. The intention at all levels, Mr. President, is to ensure that the Commission is independent, that it functions independently, and that it does the job that it is tasked to do. As I have indicated, they appear to me to be quite serious. And those who are within reach of the Integrity in Public Life Ordinance would all, no doubt by now, have received communication from the Integrity Commission indicating that we had to file our declaration of assets. I wish to take a moment to indicate that the declaration of assets is not a public filing. I say that for the benefit of members of the public generally, but I also say it for the benefit of those who are affected by the legislation. That the intention is that these declarations are filed with the Commission and are for the eyes of and the perusal of the members of the Integrity Commission. They are the ones, therefore, who would, if they were to spot something irregular or improper, have the mandate by law to investigate and to go further with the matter. They are also the ones to ensure that those who are caught by the legislation do the necessary filings and do what they are expected to do. I say that because it appears that there is a fear on the part of some who are caught by the legislation that their business is going to be in the newspaper. There is also, it appears, an expectation by some who are not caught by the legislation that they're going to know everybody's business because it's now going to be in the newspaper. So I want to dissuade anyone from those kinds of thoughts. Those who are caught should know that they have the protection of law and that the information is disclosed only to the Commission. And those who are out there who are curious about what people have, they should also know that this is not designed for that, but rather this is designed to provide the necessary check, and the Commission, an independent commission constituted as I have suggested, that commission will have the responsibility to ensure that if there are concerns, then those concerns are investigated. I hope that those comments give some comfort to those who are caught by the legislation and those who are outside the ambit of the legislation. And so we expect that this commission will operate independently. We expect that it will do its job. And we feel as a government, Mr. President, that whilst others talk about good governance, it has become language that is popular nowadays, that we as a government are demonstrating good governance. We are not just talking about it. We are not just creating chatter in the public square about good governance. We are actually doing what is necessary. To put it differently, we are not just talking the talk, we are walking the walk. And I believe that that has not got enough attention. I believe that many commentators have glossed over the fact that this government has kept its word and its commitment to the people of Nevis, that we will operationalize integrity in public life. Mr. President, if the members of this House and the public wanted any clearer indication of the seriousness of my administration in relation to this aspect of good governance, it is that these letters that I referred to that came from the Commission to many of us, indicating that we had to file the required paperwork, with them the declaration of assets, that we had to file those declarations of assets by the 30th of September, 2019. That is what the letter said to us, that we were required by the Commission to file those declarations by the 30th of September, 2019. We sat in the cabinet and we discussed it as a cabinet, and my colleagues and I on this side were comfortable that we should not only file by the deadline, but we should file well before the deadline. And so we filed in an historic move. All of us went up, one by one. A young person told us it looked like a group of penguins in line. But we went up one by one, Mr. President, together, and we filed our declaration of assets on the 20th day of September, 2019, 10 days earlier than the deadline given by the Commission. Only 2 members did not file on that day. And they did not file because they were abroad on official business. But they have assured me that they filed upon their return. And so that I can say with a great degree of confidence that every member of my cabinet has done what is necessary under the relevant legislative provisions of the Integrity in Public Life Ordinance. I believe, Mr. President, that ought to be commended out there in the public, and that the people of Nevis ought to recognize that as a government we are serious about doing what we say we will do. However, we are aware that despite the clamor that we get for good governance, for better governance, for greater transparency, more and more it is apparent to us that when people talk about it, they mean the politicians must be open and transparent, but nobody else. The politicians, Mr. President, but nobody else. Because it seems to me that there is a misconception in the public square that only politicians can be dishonest. And only politicians can put their hand in the proverbial cookie jar. I believe the evidence will suggest that oftentimes when we hear about hands being in the cookie jar, it is not the politicians. But we have the reputation, whether deserved or undeserved, that is the reputation that politicians have garnered over the years. And so we as politicians have to do what we have to do. And I believe that certainly the members on this side of the House have demonstrated that we are prepared to do what we have to do. Because not only were we the ones to pass the legislation, we have been the ones to operationalize it, and we were the first ones in the history of this island, indeed in the history of this country, to file declarations of assets formally with the Integrity Commission on the 20th of September. The reason I put it that way, that there is a perception out there that when people talk about good governance and transparency, in truth, they only want the politicians to be impacted by it. It's because we are aware that there has been a bit of an uproar about the width, the ambit of the legislation. I believe all of us would be aware that the legislation covered a wide number of people. It talked about, for example, our statutory corporations, the board members. It talked about heads of departments. It talked about various individuals involved in public life, like the political parties. And many have responded in a way to say that, listen, if I am going to be on a board and getting a little $200 a month, then it is not worth it. I prefer not to serve than to have to disclose my assets. That has been one of the responses that has come. Matter of fact, we have been advised that some board members are prepared to resign because they're saying that whatever little reward, and we know the reward is small. So for those out there who may not be serving on a board and feel that there is some large reward or big reward, the reward is small. Most boards pay maybe $400, some less. The good people on the Nevis Tourism Board, for example, agree to serve for free. And some, I think, do not go well beyond $500 a month. So people are saying, listen, if I'm only going to get $200 or $300 a month, to serve on a board, then I prefer to withdraw my services because I do not wish to be subjected to the imposition of good governance. And so, Mr. President, we as a government have been faced with a choice. Do we insist on the rigor and ambit and width of the legislation as drafted? Or do we seek to adjust it because clearly it will only work if it has the buy-in, the support of those that it impacts? And so we have had to look at that anew to see what we could do to make the legislation more fit for purpose and to release from its ambit some of those who are complaining and to ensure that those within its ambit are those that are supposed to be and that the public would wish to see in its ambit. And so we have come today to make some adjustments. There was also a secondary concern. And that secondary concern was that the legislation as passed put a considerable onus on those who fell within its ambit to do what the commissioners require of them. So, for example, if the commissioners say that you ought to file your declarations by September 30th, and you were not to comply, then there are sanctions that the Commission can take which were quite significant, including significant fines. And we thought to ourselves, that is good, and as it should be. But what happens if members of the Commission were not to do what they were supposed to do? We understand what happens if those subject to the legislation did not do the right thing. But what about those who are charged with managing the Integrity Commission? What of those who are charged with the machinery to make sure it works? How, for example, can we be certain that when we take in our bank statements and our land title and all that we need to take in, and they find out this is how much the Premier has? Because remember, the legislation as it was drafted not only spoke to us, it spoke to our spouses, our children. This is all that we have. How are we to be certain that that is not going to make it onto Facebook under some fake profile? And what will be the consequence of any breach? And so we thought, on reflection, that the penalties for those who do not comply with the legislation should be no different to the penalties for those who abuse the trust reposed in them under the legislation. And so we'll get to that as well. But that, Mr. President, was one of the new provisions that we are proposing, that those commissioners and those working in the Integrity Commission's office should be subjected to similar consequences if they were to abuse the information that they are to receive under the provisions of the legislation. Similar in nature to those of us subject to the legislation if we do not file within the requisite period of time. And so that is also now provided for. Thirdly, Mr. President, there was an issue that those who had assumed these offices as commissioners had not taken an oath of secrecy, an oath of confidentiality. We all know, Mr. President, you would know and the public would know, that as cabinet members we take an oath. And that is because matters discussed in the confines of the cabinet should remain confidential unless, of course, the cabinet were to determine otherwise. And we recognize that no oath had been taken and been provided for. We also want to make it clear that this is not just about the members of the Commission, because frankly, when we filed on the 20th of September 2019, there was no member of the Commission present. we all took a sealed envelope and delivered it to a member of staff. Because recall I said at the outset that the Commission has staff members that have been provided to the Commission. And so when we went in and sealed envelopes, we delivered to the staff of the Commission. And we are saying that the staff as well has to understand that they have a duty. And that confidentiality also applies to them. And therefore, we are making it clear that the Commission and the entire machinery of the Commission has to be subject to the strictest confidentiality if we're going to instill confidence in the process. And so, Mr. President, we have come today for that reason. I want to make one last point before I go to the legislation itself. And that is that the public and the House should be comfortable and confident that in what we are seeking to do, we have not just pulled it out of thin air. That we have had the benefit of some discussions with the members of the Commission themselves, who themselves have sought refinement of the legislation. And that we have heard from our public servants, we have heard from those serving on the boards of public corporations, and we have therefore sought to narrow the ambit of the legislation so that some would not feel burdened by the requirements in this modern age of good governance. We, the politicians, well, there are members of the cabinet who are not politicians. We, the politicians in the cabinet, and those who are not politicians in the cabinet, have taken the collective decision that we will comply, and we have done so. And not only did we do so, we did so 10 days before the deadline. And I am very proud of that. Now, if I can quickly, Mr. President, given that sort of background, speak to the bill that is before us. This bill seeks to amend the Integrity in Public Life Ordinance, and it is styled Integrity in Public Life Amendment Bill 2019. The principal ordinance, clearly, is the Integrity in Public Life Ordinance, which was number 2 of 2013. And we are proposing to amend Section 2 by deleting the definition of person in public life and replacing it with the following. Person in public life means a person who holds an office specified in Schedule 1, except in the case of permanent secretaries and heads of department, where such persons hold an acting appointment for a period not less than 12 months. By inserting in the appropriate alphabetical sequence the following new definition. Child means a child of a person who has not attained the age of 18 years and is not married, or having attained that age is under the age of 25 and not married, and his house and the public is aware. The original legislation passed in 2013 required that the member of staff of the Commission should be a public servant. The Commission, having done its own review, having done some interviews, thought that it should have the flexibility to hire who it wants, and that we should not have a public servant, the insistence that the person must be a public servant. There's also, I think, a further point to be made. There appears to be a view in some quarters that if the staff are public servants and therefore answerable to the government, that it somehow impacts the independence of the functioning of that office. And remember, we have pledged, all of us, to ensure that that office functions independently. And so what we have done is removed the requirement that the staff have to be public servants, leaving it therefore open for the Commission to staff as it saw fit, consistent, of course, with the budget and the budgetary allocations that they'll be given. Amendment to Section 15. Where a person who is required to do so fails to file a declaration in accordance with this section or without reasonable cause, fails to furnish further particulars in accordance with Section 20, the Commission shall publish such fact in the Gazette and at least one newspaper in general circulation on the island of Nevis. So all of you out there, in the sound of my voice, under the sound of my voice, if you do not file within the time prescribed by the Commission, or having filed, the Commission is asking you for additional information, if you fail and or refuse to do so, your name and the fact that you have failed to do so can be published in the Gazette and at least one newspaper in general circulation. The Commission may at any time after the publication referred to in this subsection make an ex parte application to the High Court for an order directing such person to comply with the ordinance, and the court may, in addition to making such an order, impose such conditions as it thinks fit, including costs. So the thing getting serious now. So if you're caught by the legislation and you fail to comply, or having complied with the filing deadline, you fail to provide additional particulars that the Commission so requires, the Commission can publish your name and the fact of your failure in the Gazette and in one newspaper in general circulation. And so you will see a headline, Mark Brantley refuses to file. Or Mark Brantley, having filed, refuses to provide additional information. Step one. Step two, at any time after such publication, if I am still refusing, the law is now saying that the Commission can go to the court ex parte. That's important because it means they can go by itself. Commission doesn't have to involve you. The Commission can go to the court ex parte and seek from the court an order that you are in violation of the provisions of the law. And the court then can make such order, including the imposition of conditions as it thinks fit, including costs. You have to note that, Mr. President, because this is where it now starts to cost you. Not you, Mr. President. Let me go back to my example, Mark Brantley. This is where it now starts to cost Mark Brantley. Because the order that is made, the court can award costs that Mark Brantley will have to pay. We go on further to say, a person who fails to comply with the directions of the court commits an offense and is liable on conviction to a fine of $50,000. Mr. President, you see, this is serious business. The people of the island say they want good governance. The people of the island have agitated. They tell us that this is what they want and need. The party which now forms the government campaigned on the basis that we will deliver it. And I'm here today proud to say that we have delivered it. But it comes, Mr. President, with some very serious implications that our people must understand. And this is one such implication, that you have an onus on you by law to comply with the law. And if you were not to comply with the law, then there are consequences for such non-compliance. I move on, therefore, to Section 27. We are repealing Section 27 and replacing it to say that a commissioner or an employee of the Commission who performs any function in the service of the Commission shall treat all declarations or information relating to such declarations as secret and confidential, and shall not disclose or communicate to an unauthorized person or allow any such person to have access to any such declarations or information. Put differently, Mr. President, nobody, no commissioner or any worker working in that office of the commissioner should disclose any information received to any unauthorized person, any third party, or there will be consequences for that. And it goes back to what I said at the start, Mr. President, that we're seeking to ensure that there's a balance. that there's an onus on those who are caught by the legislation, and there's equally an onus on the police, those that are policing the legislation, being the commissioners and their staff. Any person who contravenes subsection 1, that is, any person who were to disclose any confidential information improperly, commits an offense and is liable on summary conviction to a fine of $50,000 or to a term of imprisonment not exceeding 5 years, or to both such fine and imprisonment. An unauthorized person, is this supposed to be authorized or unauthorized? I'm saying an authorized person, an authorized person, forgive me, Mr. President, an authorized person who publishes information which comes to his or her knowledge pursuant to subsection 1 to an unauthorized person commits an offense and is liable on summary conviction to a fine of $50,000 or to a term of imprisonment not exceeding 5 years, or to both such fine and imprisonment. For the purposes of this section, an unauthorized person is a person other than a person authorized to receive information, A, under this ordinance in relation to the financial affairs of a person in public life, or B, by reason of an order of a judge or the High Court. Amendment to Schedule 1. Schedule 1 of the principal ordinance is hereby repealed and replaced with the following. And this is important, Mr. President, because this is as a consequence of the various conversations had. This is now the legislature's effort to scale back, to restrict the hitherto wide ambit of the legislation. Remember, I said that we had an outcry from many who said that it was too wide. So here who is now caught by the legislation, this is important. Here who is now required to file on time and having filed to answer, legal advisor is required. Permanent secretaries, I see some of them are here today. They are caught by the legislation. And if the permanent secretaries are wondering why, let us remember that the permanent secretaries are the chief financial officers for their ministries. They are the ones who handle the money. When we pass the budget, an X amount of money is allocated to a particular ministry. It is for the permanent secretaries as the chief financial officers to manage that vote, to manage the monies. I believe that maybe we could have left out the ministers and just put in the permanent secretaries. Because ultimately, they are the ones, Mr. President, who manage the money. So I want them to listen to me clearly, those who are here and those who are not but are listening. That they are the chief financial officers for their ministries. And that is why it is critical that they be included. And because they're included and we are committed to our civil servants, we have decided we should be included too. Legal officers, I see some of them are here, who are employed in the public service above the level of grade N40. So hitherto we had said legal officers, we now are going to limit it by the grade. So basically we're saying those at the higher levels are caught. Heads of department and directors employed in the public service above the level of grade N40. Again, the previous language says heads of department. But the sense was that it was too broad. And that some heads of departments really had no contact with money and with the expenditure, etc., of the government. And so we thought, let us again push it to the higher levels, and we say above grade N40. The chairman and managers of majority government-owned or controlled banks or other financial institutions or statutory corporations or companies. So hitherto we had the board. We have now removed the other members of the board. And we have said that this obligation will lie on the chairperson who should be the person responsible for the board, and the manager, the person who does the day-to-day management. And some may ask, well, why the manager? And we know that if damage is going to be done, sometimes that is where the damage can be done. And we don't want a situation where anybody is managing something and therefore doing the day-to-day. And then we hear that some of the material went where it's supposed to go, and some went where it was not supposed to go. So we want the relevant people, the right people, to be caught by the legislation. This schedule shall for all purposes be treated as coming into force on the 20th of June 2018. Now, why is it relevance? My legal team is telling me that this can be retroactive, so I'm going with them. But the relevance of it is that we recognize, Mr. President, that some who are complaining that the ambit was too wide have not filed. But the Commission would have written to them under the provision of the old law, requiring them to file. And so technically, many of them are now in default. We do not wish, since we advised the Commission that we intended to come to the House and make some amendments. And incidentally, I should say he's not here, that I have also had discussions with the Honourable Member opposite on this matter. So it really should come as a surprise to no one at all that it had been our intention to come back to do exactly what we're doing here. So what we're seeking to do with that provision is to cover those persons so that they are not subjected to the harsh rigors of the law, by essentially saying that they can put to one side the request from the Commission for them to file because it was as if they were never part of it, they were never included and subject to the legislation. So I thought, Mr. President, that that is an important provision that should give some comfort. I will tell you, people have been calling me regularly and saying they're concerned because they understand that they're subject to the legislation and they have not yet filed because they're protesting one thing or the other. Some have asked for an extension of time within which to file. But we have discussed with the Commission, discussed with the member opposite, discussed internally, and decided that these provisions are in the best interests of the island going forward and what we're seeking to achieve, and that it was better to have legislation that was complied with than to have large-scale non-compliance, or worse, people refusing to give up their service that we need in public life, refusing to serve on boards and the like, because they were concerned that they would be subjected to this legislation. And so I hope, Mr. President, that I have outlined what it is we're here today to do. I have sought to give relief to those who say they needed some relief. I have sought to say to the commissioners and their staff that they too have important obligations and consequences under the legislation. I have sought to give some comfort to those of us who have to file, that our filings are going to be confidential and that we ought not to expect those filings to be in a newspaper or on social media. And that, with all that I've said, I hope that the public would agree that we are seeking to make this better. In relation to children, I didn't spend much time there, but what I will say is that the complaint that came was that some of us who are getting on in age, Mr. President, have children now who are grown, living their own lives, some married, having their own families, and that it was onerous to say that their details as well had to be disclosed. And that is why we've now sought to limit it in the way that we have limited it, but to say to those gentlemen out there on this International Men's Day, I should have started by wishing everybody a happy International Men's Day. But perhaps it's a good point now to say that we are catching all the children, those in wedlock and those outside of wedlock. If you know they belong to you, you have to claim them because they're yours, and they would fall within the ambit of the legislation. but not adult children who are out on their own, because the legislation now is trying to define and to say, let me go back to it so that we are clear. Children, somebody under the age of 18, or one who's under 25, not married, and is pursuing a course of higher education. And that we've included stepchild, adopted child, and children born out of wedlock, meaning all children are included. So I hope that that clarifies, Mr. President, the position. I hope the public and the House is clear as to what we're seeking to do. And I wish this bill safe passage for this honorable House.
Mr. President, I rise to lend my support to the mover of the bill, which is before this Honorable House, the Integrity in Public Life Amendment Bill 2019. And Mr. President, I want to commend the mover of the bill for his presentation just prior to me being here at this podium. And why I say that is because he has gone through the amendments that have been brought here in a comprehensive way. And I believe that that has brought some clarity to this particular bill. I recall when we were here back in, I believe it was June, was it June of 2018? When was it? When was it we were here? For the initial 2013, right. 2013, that's right, okay. Since then, there have been some, discussions in the public domain, and the mover would have alluded to some of those discussions, of course, yes. And indeed, there should be discussions regarding the works of Parliament or this Assembly. So I have no difficulties with that at all. Indeed, persons would come and they would indicate that there should have been more added or more teeth to it and so forth. And even as you heard, the mover alluded to the fact that persons were even saying that all of the information that we would have filed back in September should be before the public or in the public square. All sorts of things have been said, of course. The bottom line is, though, I do believe that there are certain things that happen in a person's life, even though they are in public life eventually, in terms of being a politician or a public official. There are some limitations to what, of course, should be before the public in terms of their actual finances. I will say when I filed, I told myself I am broke. You go to the bank sometimes and you withdraw, you put on some money, and then when it's all said and done, you're asked to get a bank statement, and we look at it and say, my goodness, I'm a broke public official, and I hope I'll be broke up to the point when I get out of government, because, yeah, this legislation is going to make sure that I stay broke. But I don't have a problem with it. I don't, well, of course, I'll have to disclose that too. But I don't have a problem with it, Mr. President, because I never thought that we would have had to come here to pass an Integrity in Public Life bill or amend it so as to govern the behavior of public officials, whether myself, members on this particular side, or this side, or members on the opposite side, or anyone else in public life. Because you would have thought that you're elected or you're put into a particular position to serve, and serve you must, and serve the people who you are there to serve, and carry out the mandate that you are asked to carry out. So I didn't realize that we would have gotten to this point, but now we are here because times have changed, people have changed, circumstances have changed all over the world, not just in St. Kitts and Nevis, and more particularly in Nevis, but circumstances have changed and people have changed along with those circumstances. So whatever is necessary to bring things back in line has to be done. So this bill has brought some clarity and has brought some platform upon which we can certainly be guided upon. Mr. President, a bill such as this certainly have laid out to us ways that we as public officials have to govern ourselves or conduct ourselves in maintaining certain ethical behaviors in government. And when you put yourself up to serve, it must be understood that you're serving not just your interests. I mean, your interest should be secondary. The primary interest would be to serve the people who you're there to govern and also the island or the country that you're asked to serve. But this bill certainly has helped to deal with some of the conflicts of interest, if you really examine it, and the practices that one can consider to be corrupt practices, I'm sure. And it puts the burden on everyone, whether you are the public official or even the persons who are asked to serve on the commission and oversee the operation of this particular legislation. So it brings into focus what everyone that is involved has to do in order to ensure that we have what should I say, a much better island, a well-governed island, I should say. And that is why I do believe that my support for this bill will always be wholesome and there for the general public to see. But Mr. President, in looking at this particular bill, I'm going to get into the bill, but I'll say a few more things before I get close down to the nitty-gritties that are in this particular bill. I believe that one should always be doing the right thing, even when no one is watching. I think that is clear. You're elected to serve, you're in a particular position to serve, you should always be doing the right thing, even when no one is watching. But even if no one is watching, or even if anyone is watching, then this particular legislation brings you back in line. And it sounds like a daunting, challenging task, but it has to be done once you put up your hand and you say you're going to serve. So one must always be doing the right thing, even when no one is watching. And I reiterate that because I am currently the chairman of the NHLDC. You heard the mover of the bill indicate who are impacted by this bill, and it certainly impacts me, not only as a minister or member of cabinet or member of this assembly, but also as the chairman of that organization. It also impacts the person who falls below me in terms of the manager, and I hope he's listening too, because both of us, when it comes to that particular institution, are impacted. And I bring that up, Mr. President, because I'm certain prior to 2013, if this legislation was in place, we would not have heard anything about house and land being sold to members of family, because that is also something that this legislation covers. That certainly wouldn't have been an accepted practice back in 2013 or prior to 2013 if this legislation was on the books. Mr. President, if this was in place prior to 2013, you would not have heard a manager, for example, buying crown property without the proper authorization of the necessary arms of government. You wouldn't have heard that. Mr. President, even I can go on further and say if this was in place prior to 2013, because I'm talking because I know why I'm saying these things. And I see you come up on your chair as if to say, well, careful. But I think without going into any specifics, I believe the point is being made and why I'm going down this road. Because you see, when people are entrusted with certain responsibilities, then I said before that you do not need, or you must be doing the right thing even when persons are not watching. And these are the things that I am alluding to that were happening or that has happened in this island without the necessary framework or necessary tools to deal with issues of those sort. And so, Mr. President, I do believe that once we move forward, the mover of the bill, who is the leader of this island, he has clamored loudly for this to be done. All of us on this side would have had a choice whether to say, well, we're not going to be a part of that with you. But we have decided and determined that we will be a part of this particular administration and be guided accordingly by the legislation that is before us. Mr. President, let me just turn quickly to a section of the legislation that we have before us this morning. And the amendment that is being done to Part 3, Section 15 of this legislation. That speaks to the persons who are asked to file and the failure to file and the likes, and also those on the commission and what they are asked to do under this legislation. Now, there are 3 sections that have been inserted. Section 7, Section 8, and Section 9 under this, or part, sorry, let's back up. Subsections. In Section 15, these 3 subsections have been inserted. 1, which is now Section 7, or Subsection 7, where a person who is required to do so failed to file a declaration in accordance with this section, or without reasonable cause, fails to furnish further particulars in accordance with Section 20, the Commission shall publish such fact in the Gazette or at least one newspaper in general circulation on the island of Nevis. That's subsection 7. Subsection 8 speaks to the Commission may, at any time after the publication, refer to in subsection 7, that is what I just read, make an ex parte application to the High Court for an order directing such person to comply with the ordinance, and the court may, in addition to making such an order, impose such conditions it thinks fit, including cost. And subsection 9, a person who fails to comply with the direction of the court commits an offense and is liable to conviction of a fine of $50,000. I read those out again. They were read by the mover of the bill, but I read those out again, Mr. President, because I believe this has something in it that all of us can certainly understand. If I were to file my declaration, Mr. President, and when I said my declaration, I did mention earlier that I filed mine, and I'm broke. And I say that again, and I'll say it over and over again. But I file my declaration, and I go downtown, and I hear Alexis only have $10 in the bank. It's either it came from the bank, or it came from perhaps someone from the commission. I'm not saying that it is definitely someone from the commission. But I haven't heard around Charlestown that I have $10 in the bank. I haven't heard it prior to September 30th, the end of September. But if I'm to hear it now, I'll have some concerns. That is what this legislation is attempting to say to me and to anyone out there who would pick up this legislation, that what you file should be a secret. It should be kept confidential. It should be something that is known between you and the persons who are seeing it there, who form part of the commission. It's a small community, very small community. Sometimes we tell a friend, this is what a matter is, and that friend has a friend, and that friend has a friend, and it goes on, and then before you know it, all of the friends, friend A, B, C, D, E, F, G, all of them have that information. So I'm just imploring upon the persons who form this commission, or who are part of this commission, they know who they are. You have an important and significant role to play in safeguarding and protecting the information that we have submitted. And we have done so without any delay or any difficulty. So I expect that the effort that we would have exerted in ensuring that we bring these information forward would be reciprocated by the persons who form this commission and that is to ensure that this information remain confidential. But then this legislation speaks to what the penalties can be if, for example, those information are ever disclosed, and it is known and proven that they're disclosed by the persons who are the vanguard, the safekeepers of these information that we would have submitted. I mean, Mr. President, if you look further, if I were to relate back to subsection 9, there is a penalty for someone like me if I were to fail to file my declaration, which is $50,000. Remember, I told you I'm broke, so I had to run and get mine done because I don't have $50,000 to pay as a penalty at all. But, Mr. President, the bill before us has been well thought out, I suppose, and indeed there will always be shortcomings. And based on the discussions prior to coming here today, obviously there were some shortcomings, and that's why we are having these few amendments being made. Over the years to come, as time change and people change, there may be need to come back. There may be need to come back, and of course, I personally think that there will absolutely be need to come back. But of course, in all of the actions moving forward, I do believe it would be within the rights of anyone to do, but it should be within the best interest, or should be the best interest of everyone that is taken into account when any future amendments are made. So indeed, you look at the legislation, we have disclosed our assets. We have proven to be accountable in many ways, because accountability means that you have presented your disclosure, and it stands for scrutiny by those who should be scrutinizing it. And there must be some clarity, I'm sure, with that in terms of what we would have presented. So, Mr. President, I do believe that we have demonstrated some leadership on this side of the House in terms of what we are trying to accomplish with this particular bit of legislation. And leadership speaks to a lot of things. If you stand up and say that we will introduce integrity in public life and ensure that we have good governance on the island of Nevis, it speaks to your ability to lead, or your leadership capabilities or abilities. And that is why one has to commend the mover of the bill and indicate that he has demonstrated true leadership in fulfilling a mandate that he would have made during our last campaign, of course. And I want to commend him for that. So, Mr. President, it was not my intention to speak too long on this bill, because like I said, the bill has been in the public domain or before us for some time. We came here back in 2013 and came back earlier this year. And now we're back again with the same bill before us in terms of what it is intending to do. And that's why I do believe that the tools that are enshrined in this bill, the legislation itself, clarifies all of the misunderstanding or some of the discussions that have been had in recent times. But of course, like I said before, there may be need in the future. But for the time being, I do believe that this bill has provided us with the clarity that we seek, and it also speaks to the behavior that public officials should demonstrate moving forward here on the island of Nevis. With those few words, Mr. President, I wish this bill safe passage, and may it please you. Yeah.
Mr. President, I rise again to make a brief contribution to the debate on the Integrity in Public Life Amendment Ordinance 2019. With your permission, Mr. President, just before I make my brief presentation, I just want to place on record my sincerest gratitude to the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association and, of course, to the local branch here. I am currently taking an online course with McGill University, based in Montreal, Canada, and that course is on parliamentary governance. Of course, I still consider myself very green in the parliament. I'm just into my second year. still consider myself a freshman. And so there are a lot of things to be learned about parliamentary governance and how you conduct yourself while you're in Parliament. And the opportunity came for an online course to be taken, and I would have registered for that online course, Mr. President, and I have to give high commendation to the clerk, Mrs. Williams, because she would have pushed and encouraged me. The course would have started in August, and after I registered and I realized I was so busy in August, I was wondering whether or not I should pull back. But the clerk continued to push and encourage. And I'm happy that I decided to stay on the course. I must say as well, I must report that as a part of that course, the course runs from August this year until I think it's April next year. And as a part of that course, I had to go to Montreal, Canada for a 1-week face-to-face. And I have to say that it went exceptionally well. It was an eye-opener for me. The course is an eye-opener for me. I've been getting a lot of very relevant information with regards to parliamentary governance and parliamentary procedures. And once again, I want to place on record my sincerest gratitude to the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association for sponsoring me to attend and to be a part of this course. And as I said, special commendation to the local branch here for making that push for me to be a part of that course. Thank you very much. And now, Mr. President, my brief contribution to the Integrity in Public Life Amendment Ordinance 2019. And I want to join with my colleague here from Nevis 4 in commending the mover of that bill. And I believe, Mr. President, that when we campaigned about moving this bill and having this bill become law, I believe the mover of the bill was quite sure that he would have a team that is very clean. And that is why the mover of the bill was so confident in bringing this bill to this honorable House and getting it passed. Mr. President, this is an administration. This is a party. These are parliamentarians who are clean and who do not have anything to hide. And, Mr. President, this is an administration that is on a good governance agenda. We are on a good governance path, and we are about transparency. And this bill is about transparency. You would have heard from the mover of the bill that we would have filed on time, and we are leading by example. Whatever we do in this administration, Mr. President, we try to be as transparent as possible and accountable as possible. And that is why we were not afraid to file, because we don't have anything to hide. We do everything above board. We lead, and that is what we are seeking to continue to do in this administration. And that is why, Mr. President, we'll be here for a very long time. Mr. President, I just want to add my bit in terms of the amendments that were made to the bill. Now, of course, in the bill, we heard quite a lot about the penalties for persons who are supposed to file and do not file on time or do not want to file at all. We have heard from the mover, we have heard from my colleague about the importance of persons, the commissioner, the commissioners, the persons on the commission, as well as the staff of the commission, Mr. President. Because we must understand and remember that we live in a very small society. And often, Mr. President, persons who hold certain responsibilities believe sometimes that they can be vindictive. And they believe as well, Mr. President, that they can use certain information for political reasons and to gain political mileage. And so, I'm happy that we would have thought it fit to make these amendments to make it abundantly clear and absolutely clear to the commissioner and his staff and his team that you too are accountable in terms of the information that you are provided with. The information that the members here, as well as all who are caught in the net, would have to provide to the commission. That information, Mr. President, must be kept confidential at all times. And so we are sounding a warning with the amendments that have been made here that if the commissioner and members of the commission and the staff of the commission believe that they can put people's information out in public. I know nowadays this is the age of going on social media for everything. And so if they believe that they can place people's confidential information on social media, in the newspaper, in the realm of the public, that they don't have penalties, well, they need to think again, Mr. President. And so I want to applaud the mover of the bill once again, and all of us who are part of putting this together, and applauding the amendments that were made to ensure that people's business is kept confidential. As you would have heard, everybody in Nevis has a friend. The commissioner has a friend, who has a friend, who has a friend. And if the list goes on and on and on. And you know, a lot of the times when you tell somebody, I'm telling you something in confidence, it never stays there. It never stays there, because that person who you told in confidence will tell somebody else, are telling you in confidence. And somebody else are telling you in confidence. And then you realize it goes throughout Nevis. It goes throughout the diaspora. Because we know nowadays when things go on social media, even before they go on social media, people who are in the diaspora here before people who are here in Nevis. And so we want to remind the persons who are charged with holding this information that you have a duty to perform, and you must ensure that the information that you have at your disposal, you are not sharing with any unauthorized persons. Or else, you'll have to pay the fine if you're found guilty, or you may actually have to go to St. Kitts to serve a little prison time. Mr. President, I want at this time as well to applaud the legal department. The legal advisor and members of a team are here. Because of course we know that when these things come before the House, even before they come before the House, persons need to be educated. And I know the legal department would have been at the forefront in terms of trying to get people educated, to clarify certain things within this ordinance. And I really want to commend the legal team for the great and fantastic work that they have done so far in ensuring that persons who are caught in the net are aware of what their responsibilities are. And while I'm doing that, I also want to just encourage the persons who are caught in the net as well, persons who would be affected by this ordinance, that if at any time you are not clear in terms of what your role is, what you're supposed to do, the members of the legal department are there to give guidance and clarification. Do not be afraid to call on them. If you're not comfortable calling on them, you may have a friend who is a lawyer who may be able to explain certain things to you. Because of course a lot of the times, Mr. President, the jargon that is used in these ordinances may be a bit above us, the lay people. And it may call for somebody with a legal mind to explain it. So those of us who are caught, if you need any clarification, please don't be afraid to seek the guidance of the legal team in the legal department, or if you have persons in the legal profession who you can call on. And I want to join with the mover, as well as the member for Nevis 4, who would have come and would have commended this bill. And I want as well to just assure those persons who are affected by this bill that your information will be kept in strict confidence. And we also want to say as well that if anybody thinks that the information is being put out there, if they think that their rights are being violated in any way, please do not be afraid to act. Mr. President, once again, I commend this bill, and this bill once again truly demonstrates the transparency, the good governance agenda of this administration. Mr. President, may it please you, and I wish this ordinance safe passage through this honorable House. Thank you.
Mr. President, I rise to lend my support to the bill that is presently before this honorable House, the Integrity in Public Life Amendment Bill 2019. Mr. President, while I do not wish to labor the debate on this particular bill, there is, Mr. President, a perception that all politicians are corrupt. There is, Mr. President, this perception that politicians are crooked. And there is this perception, Mr. President, that when persons get into government, they get rich overnight. There's the perception, Mr. President. Well, Mr. President, here is a piece of legislation that I believe, Mr. President, that when I see figures like $50,000, I say, poor me. I say, poor me, lad, $50,000 for not doing what you're supposed to do. And that, Mr. President, should give persons reason to pause. Because I'm saying, Mr. President, that I am hoping that if there were ever a time for people to take their role and responsibilities very seriously as it regards to politics and as it regards to serving the people, at least $50,000 should make them think twice. Mr. President, this is a piece of legislation that I believe it was the member for Nevis number 4 said ought not to have been. And I, Mr. President, tend to somewhat agree with that line of thinking. That it ought not to have been, Mr. President, because we expect and we hope that persons who offer themselves in elective politics were persons of integrity in the first place. So it is somewhat kind of sad that there had to have been such a legislation. But at the same time, Mr. President, if it becomes necessary, then so be it. Because I am hoping that this, Mr. President, would also be a determinant and a deterring factor for persons who are looking to politics and who are looking to get in government to do certain things and to achieve certain things. I am hoping that it will be a deterrent. Mr. President, I want to join with the previous speakers and certainly say how thankful and grateful we are to our legal department, because this was a piece of legislation, Mr. President, and the amendments went through quite some discussion. And I want to commend our legal advisor and her staff for giving the guidance and allowing us to come to Parliament with a refined piece of legislation. I believe, Mr. President, it addressed quite a number of concerns that many persons would have had. It streamlined the legislation, and also, Mr. President, it also sends a very serious message when you think about $50,000. And I'm going to say it again, when you think of $50,000, all I'm saying, poor me, Mr. President. And I want to wish this bill safe passage.
Mr. President, I rise to conclude the discussion on the Integrity in Public Life Amendment Bill 2019. The bill now has been read a second time. And, Mr. President, I would be obliged if we can move to committee stage and have this bill read a third time and passed.
Second.
Mr. President, I rise to second the motion.
Motion is that the bill be now read a second time. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
A bill to amend the Integrity in Public Life Ordinance number 2 of 2013 and for matters related thereto are connected therewith.
The bill has been read a second time. House in committee stage.
Clause 8.
Question is that
Didn't you section?
Clause 3, and you clause 3.4. Certainly, remember the commission staff shall before so many functions. You can subscribe to all the secrets in the form described as Schedule 4. So Schedule 4 is already captured. We just need to add the schedule. We have it before. We don't need a new clause, a new section. Yes, with Schedule 4 is so you're saying we need a section 8? Alright. So, clause 8. Yeah.
clause 8, I'm just pointing out something. Where you have speaker.
Yes, we were getting a new version. It was supposed to be fixing that to put president.
Oh, well, it might not get here in time, so maybe we could just change it here, but that would be what would be president. Sorry.
Could we also enter this oath? It only covers the chairman, member, or secretary. What about other employees? Because the section refers to staff. Every member of the commission and staff of the commission. So it speaks to being appointed chairman, member, secretary, or staff.
Because the act provides only for them to appoint a secretary, no other member. But we could add it, we should add it.
Chairman, member, secretary, employee. So we'll amend the oath just to add the category of employee, chairman, member, secretary, or employee. And then also the oath should be captioned Schedule 4. We're clear now? But, Mr. Chairman, are we okay?
Yes.
So the question now
The question is that subsection 8 do form part of the bill. Those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? The ayes have it.
Clause 7.
The question is that clause 7 do form part of the bill. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
Clause 6.
The question is that clause 6 do form part of the bill. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
Clause 5.
Question is that clause 5 yes. No, it's all right.
We're not going to make any amendments.
The question is that clause 5 do form part of the bill. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
Clause 4.
Question is that clause 4 do form part of the bill. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
Clause 3.
Question is that clause 3 do form part of the bill. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
Clause 2.
The question is that clause 2 do form part of the bill. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
Clause 1.
Question is that clause 1 do form part of the bill. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
Enacting clause.
Question is that the enacting clause do form part of the bill. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
Title.
Question is that title do form part of the bill. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
President, I apologize to back, but I was checking something as you were approaching. Section 5 of this bill, amendment to section 15. I think there needs to be renumbering. Section 15 ends at subsection 5. It should be 1, 2, 3, and then even 5. 4 is missing. 4 is missing. So, Mr. Chair, what should happen is this is the gazetted copy, which is correct. The section 15 ends at subsection 5. So the amendment to section 15 should start numbering at 6, 7, and 8 as opposed to 7, 8, and 9. If I'm making sense, Mr. President.
Yes.
Yes.
6.
Gazetted version of the legislation has the correct thing, which is numbering to subsection 5. We amended that. And so we now need to go 6, 7, and 8 as opposed to 7, 8, and 9. So we're just changing the numbering on the amendment. Mr. Chair?
Yes, yes, I have it.
So at paragraph 5, we just want to renumber it. 7 becomes 6, 8 becomes 7, and 9 becomes 8. So when read with the principal ordinance, it makes sense.
Anything else?
That's it.
Yes.
Let's make that work.
Okay. House, resume.
Mr. President, I'm pleased to report that the bill shortly entitled Integrity in Public Life Amendment Bill 2019 has gone through the committee stages with some amendments, and I would now ask, Mr. President, the bill having been read first time, having had a first reading and a second reading, that the bill be read a third time and passed.
Mr. President, I rise to second the motion.
Question is that the bill shortly entitled the Nevis, Integrity in Public Life Amendment Ordinance 2019 be read a third time and passed.
Those in favor?
Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
A bill to amend the Integrity in Public Life Ordinance number 2 of 2013 and for matters related thereto or connected therewith.
The bill has been read third time and passed.
Mr. President, I rise again to lead the discussion and the debate on the Nevis Limited Liability Company. I'm sorry, forgive me. I need to take it in order. The Nevis Business Corporation Ordinance. The Nevis Business Corporation Amendment Bill 2019. The Nevis Business Corporation. My eyes not working so well, Mr. President. Please forgive me. The Nevis Business Corporation Amendment Bill 2019. Mr. President, we have two bits of legislation. I'll come to the second one when I get to it. But we're here for a very minor amendment to the Nevis Business Corporation Ordinance, which we know since 1984 has been the mainstay of the financial services industry here on the island of Nevis. Due to pressures that we have had, Mr. President, from the OECD, FATF, the European Union, through its various arms, we have come under tremendous pressure, not only here in Nevis, but throughout the financial services world, to comply initially with concerns about money laundering, terrorist financing, and the like, and more latterly, it seems, to concerns about tax and what they refer to as harmful tax practices. Whilst we have not seen any evidence that our tax practices do any harm to the European Union or others, notwithstanding, we are being told by those who make the rules in Brussels that these are concerns for them. Mr. President, those of us who stand in positions of leadership in small island developing states throughout the world, we can no doubt stand and give grand speeches, we can posture, we can argue about the fairness or unfairness, we can argue about the bullying tactics that are being employed. But at the end of the day, we are faced with a reality that in today's world, might is often right. And when you're small and when you're vulnerable, whether you like it or not, rules are set with which you have to comply. I wish to be pellucid that we do not sit, anybody from Nevis or St. Kitts Nevis, or indeed others in this Caribbean Sea that are affected, we do not sit at a high table in Brussels where decisions are being made. We have no invitation to these clubs, but yet they have appointed themselves as global policemen and have said to us that we who are sovereign states must abide by the rules that they are seeking to promulgate, or else we face consequences. Now, in the old days, Mr. President, it could be that the consequence was to declare war and to send in the military and crush these small countries who are so vulnerable and who would not have the weapons to defend ourselves. In the modern era, in this era of enlightenment, it is not to declare war militarily, but to declare war financially and economically. And so we are being told that unless we comply, we run the risk of being put on lists that they say are black. Sometimes I wonder why the lists are called black and not white, or red or yellow for that matter. But we are told that the lists are blacklists, and that if we, the people of Nevis, the wider Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis, and some of the others, Barbados, Antigua, you name it, unless we are minded to comply, then we run the risk of serious reputational damage by being put on these blacklists. Now, Mr. President, I think the House and the public should be clear that being placed on one of these blacklists has serious consequences for us. We are already being advised that there is a phenomenon called de-risking that has developed, where banks in the developed countries of the world are saying that the Caribbean region is too risky for them to do business in. And as a consequence, they are delinking themselves from the Caribbean in a phenomenon described as de-risking. They are saying that to do business as correspondent banks for Bank of Nevis and for National Bank and for all the banking institutions that are in the Caribbean, that in order to do that, they are exposing themselves to heightened risks. And as a result, they want to minimize that risk. And the way they're seeking to minimize that risk is to leave the region and to simply cut off the banks in our region. This has been a matter that has concerned us all at the local and regional level. We have been advocating quite strongly internationally that this is a wrong approach. Because let us imagine for a moment that the banks here in Nevis are cut off. That is, no longer have any correspondent banking relationships. Mr. President, will not be able to wire money. We will not be able to engage in trade or pay for goods and services that we're importing. Even credit card transactions, how are we to do those? We say our mainstay is tourism. When the tourist comes and he stays at the Four Seasons at Montpelier, how is he to pay? Because we may be unable to process that credit card. I say these things because our public must appreciate the gravity of the situation that we face. And that absent our return to an economy based on barter, where you work for me and I give you 2 fish, and 6 mango. We have to ensure that we remain aligned with what the international community is requiring. And that is why I started by saying, posture as we may, argue as we might, we can scream at the loudest voices that this is unfair, immoral. And I could hear the legal advisor thinking that it is also anti-competitive. That whilst we say all of these things, we nevertheless have a reality. And that reality is that the might of Europe and the might of the world is saying to small jurisdictions like Nevis, do as I say or else. And the or else can have the effect of eroding all the gains that we would have made as an island. The or else would have the effect of destroying the economy of this island. The or else, Mr. President, would mean that the serious reputational risks would be visited upon us with all the attendant consequences. And so we have come today to do something which on its face is simple, but which I think our people must understand. I am sure, Mr. President, that you will recall that it was on Christmas Eve 2018 that we were in this very house. You know why? Not because you and I and the other members don't have families to go and shop and enjoy our Christmas Eve with. We were here because the European Union had imposed a deadline of December 31st, 2018 upon us, independent countries, and said to us that unless you complied with that deadline, you will remain on this list of uncooperative jurisdictions. And so we had to come. Christmas Eve, 2018. Christmas Eve 2018. Christmas Eve 2019 has not yet arrived. And no, Christmas Eve. Christmas Eve. We were here. And, Mr. President, I recall Christmas Eve. We can check. No. Well, the clerk will check on the 28th. I'm told 28th. So, after Christmas, on the eve of the New Year, we were here. So, 28th. Forgive me.
Yes.
But we were here in a season of Christmas. What was happening on the 28th? It might have been Juve and Sinkers or something? Carnival?
It was just a weekend before the end of the year.
Okay.
And because...
I'm grateful to you and the clerk for correcting the date, but the sentiment is the same.
Yes, it is. Okay, fine.
That in the heart of Christmas and Carnival, we were here in the house doing something that we were compelled to do.
Yeah, 2 days to get it done.
And, Mr. President, only through our legislative initiative on the 28th of December of last year that we were able to avoid this dreaded blacklist. But you know what the Europeans did? They say, you're not on the blacklist, we've removed you from there, but you're not yet in the clear. We're going to put you on a grey list. And unless you do more by December 31st, 2019, back on the blacklist you go. I'm saying these things because it's important that our people understand what we're dealing with. So they say unless you do more by December 31st, 2019, back on the blacklist you go. Let me stop using the word black. Back on the bad list you go. And we do not want to be on the bad list because we understand the implications for us. This, mark you, Mr. President, is absent any evidence of any harm that Nevis has caused to the EU. Absent any evidence of any harm that we have caused. Nevis is not some major haven of some kind. Nothing in Nevis happens at the level that could cause harm to an elephant like the EU. I would have used the example of the elephant and the mosquito, but I don't even think that we're a mosquito. In the scheme of international matters, we don't even rise to the size of a mosquito. Good tax practices, it's harmful, and it is causing difficulty for us. You see, there's this notion they call now populism, I think is what they're calling it. And if you're a student of politics, Mr. President, like I try to be, and you follow the political movements, particularly in Europe, you see it now in other parts of the world. Everybody's being told that your problems are the cause of somebody else. There's no political movement anymore which says to people that they must be responsible. So if you were born in rural America and you spend your time drinking Budweiser and driving a pickup truck and have not availed yourself of the opportunity to go to school and do something with yourself, you then see a young PhD graduate comes from India or Bangladesh or Nevis, and they get a big job, and you say, immigration is the cause of my problems. And so you join with those politicians who rant against immigration because they say, look at those people. They're black and brown. They speak other languages. They've come to take your job, not realizing that the man who's driving the pickup truck can't do the computer science. How are you going to do it? All he knows is how to drink Budweiser. He's not prepared himself. And in the world today, we are not urging people to prepare themselves. We are telling them somebody else is to blame for your problem. And so too in the EU. I hope they're listening now. Because they're not saying to their populations, it is perhaps failed policy over the years that has caused problems within the EU. No, they say it is little places like Nevis. Because of their tax practices, they're causing harm. And rich people are getting away without paying any taxes. That's why you're suffering. And I continue to ask the question rhetorically. If Germany, Belgium, France say they have the sovereign right to tax their people at 40%, how is it that Nevis does not have, or St. Kitts and Nevis, does not have the equally sovereign right to tax our people at 5, 10, or 0% if we so desire? I did something called revenue law when I was young. And one of the things I learned in revenue law is that tax policy was always within the domain of countries. I did a little economics, dabbled in it first year. And I was told that two of the ways that governments globally seek to influence economies, they have something called monetary policy and they have something called fiscal policy. Don't ask me about the monetary side. I've forgotten that. But on the fiscal side, that has to do with tax. Now, if I want to encourage manufacturing, I create a zone. I say you're tax-free in this zone. How else are you going to get Google and Yahoo and whoever else to come, Facebook, unless you're offering them some advantage? What else would be the purpose? And for small countries such as ours, with no oil, no gas, No bauxite, no gold, no diamonds. What do we have and how are we supposed to compete? So they're saying to us that our tax policy must be the same as the UK. Well, maybe that's why the UK is leaving them. So let me not take the UK out of it. Brother Boris says he's going to go. So let us take the UK out of it. They're saying that a little island like Nevis must have the same tax policy as Germany, as France, as Italy. And that their model, which has been shown not to have worked, Mr. President. That is a bit, when I talk about responsibility, their model has shown not to have worked. High tax. The model has not worked. But rather than revisiting their model, they tell us, no, your model must start to look like ours. A failed model. And if you are not prepared to comply, then be ready for the consequences, not of military intervention, but of economic and financial ruin. That is what they're saying to us. And our people must not lose sight of the reality of what we have to deal with. They basically are setting tax policy now, fiscal policy for us, and removing from these countries, these vulnerable countries, an important tool that we've always used to attract investment. And that tool has been tax policy. Now, if I said to a business in New York that in New York your rate is 40% and in Nevis your rate is going to be 40%, well, why must they come to Nevis? Because they like us? Why must they come to Nevis? There are no advantages. And I will go further, Mr. President, and say there's a certain hypocrisy in this approach because even within the EU, there are different rates of tax. Countries like Romania and Ireland have very low tax compared to others like Belgium and Germany. In fact, I believe in either Romania or Ireland, it is as low as 15%. But they tell us that low tax is bad. So I hope Nevis people listening, that the EU is saying low tax is bad and that we must come and we must do things differently. So, Mr. President, I know that the legislation, the amendment is small, but the implications are quite serious. We have had a series of meetings this year because I promised the financial service providers that we would try to find a solution. We have engaged Ernst & Young to seek to advise us. And we have not yet been able to untie this Gordian knot. We have not yet been able to find a palatable solution. So the last I saw from the advice team, they're saying we will have to reform the entire tax code. Reform it from top to bottom. Now, one would have thought that when we saw the dawn of the 19th of September 1983, that if the sovereign nation of St. Kitts and Nevis required an adjustment to its tax laws, it would have been our decision to make. And we would have adjusted it at a time and in a manner that suited us. Now we see that that is no longer the case. And that if the advice is to be taken, the entire tax code will have to be adjusted in order to meet these ongoing requirements. And I predict today, Mr. President, that we'll be back again and again. You know why? Every time you meet one requirement, they set another one. And at some point, our region and our world will have to recognize that this has not a thing to do with anti-competitiveness in terms of our tax structure. It has not a thing to do with causing harm. It has everything to do. Wyoming, Nevada, that's where it's going. You know why? Because America has said to the EU, hey, you can't tell us what to do. Dictate to who you can dictate to, but don't cross your path with the United States of America, because we have nuclear weapons too. Do not pass your path with America. Understand your place in Brussels. You cannot dictate to us. I heard they tried to put on a blacklist U.S. Virgin Islands and Guam. America said, you can't put our territories on any bad list. You don't have that jurisdiction. But America can say that. Who are they going to tell President Trump? Huh? Who going to stop him? To use language that we had heard in this country before. Who can stop President Trump? Who can stop him? He has said to them, back off of America. And so while the rest of us have been forced time and time again to make changes, states like Delaware, South Dakota, Nevada, they are chugging merrily along. And the business that we are losing, they are gaining. I saw an article written, I think in The Guardian 2 days ago, 3 days ago, talking about one of them. Would have been, I think, could it have been South Dakota? But mentioning the growth and indicating that in these jurisdictions you pay no tax at all. That everything you do is confidential. Nobody could get any information on you. But down here, they come to us and they say, you're not open enough. You must now have automatic exchange of information, common reporting standards, all kinds of things. I forget what I mean. CRS, BEPS, all kinds of things they're saying that we must comply with. But they can't tell America so. So you're creating an uneven playing field. Uneven playing field. And when recently I was in Romania, with a team from CARICOM trying to fight against this thing in Brussels. Why Romania? Because Romania held the seat of the European Union at that time. And while we're in Romania fighting against this, we are told that other wealthy countries were to be put on a blacklist, one of whom was Saudi Arabia. And somebody in Saudi Arabia clearly picked up the phone and reminded somebody in Europe, hey, remember how much military machinery we buy from you? And the next thing we heard, Saudi Arabia had mysteriously disappeared from the list. Because there were contracts in place, big money that Saudi Arabia was spending with them. And basically saying, if you seek in any way to harm us, we'll go elsewhere with our money. Well, poor Nevis don't have no money to spend. We don't have any military to fight. And so we must come. But in coming, we must also sensitize our people to the realities, Mr. President, of what we face. And so having laid that by way of background, I come now to the Nevis Business Corporation Amendment Bill 2019. And this is in furtherance of our commitment when we came on the 28th of December last year to do what is necessary and to ensure that we do not have to come back during the Christmas season again this year, because they've given a deadline of the 31st of December 2019 to pass these further amendments. And what we're doing here is amending Section 136. The principal ordinance is amended in Section 136 by repealing Subsection 5 and substituting the following. Notwithstanding the provisions of subsections 1, 2, 3, and 4, the tax exemptions granted to all corporations shall cease to take effect on the earlier of A, 30 June 2021, and B, if applicable, the date the corporation acquires. I see some bracketed items here. It's the language. All of those are included. Acquires, holds, owns, or deals with any new assets or engages in any new business activity that will give rise to accessible income in the absence of the exemption. Sounds simple, Mr. President. What he's basically saying here is that if you had a company in Nevis since 1984, it paid no tax here. It was what we call colloquially an offshore company, but a company incorporated under Nevis Business Corporation Ordinance. And this is now saying that those days are now over. That such a company will no longer have that exemption after the 30th of June 2021. So it is not immediate, but it is immediate enough. Because the 20th June 2021 is the 30th of June, is the cutoff date. So after 30 June 2021, all companies will have to pay tax. And it will be up to us to accept the advice of the technical people to reform the entire tax structure if this business that we've called financial services is to survive. And then they've gone on to say that while that may be the case, if the company were to acquire, hold, deal with any new assets, or engage in any new business activity that would give rise to assessable income, in the absence of that exemption, then they will pay tax as of that date. And the technical people tell me that that is what the EU said they need, so that we are not put on a bad list for 2020. So, Mr. President, I can't add any more, except from this rostrum to say to the financial services providers that we will find a way. We must work together to protect the industry, protect the jobs, and if necessary, must find new and innovative products to offer to the market given the new circumstances. The Nevis Island Administration and the Inland Revenue Department have not been concerned about collecting tax from the financial services industry. We have been concerned about the jobs, about the rent that they're paying in Charlestown, about the spin-offs in the economy, the multiply effect, and we have been concerned about the 15 million EC dollars or so that we collect from direct fees and registration fees and the like. And I ask this question because it's a question that I think needs to be asked. When a government the size of Nevis and an island the size of Nevis loses $15 million from financial services, what is to replace it? If you want harm, Mr. President, if the EU wants a conversation about causing harm, that is harmful. Because at the end of the day, we still have schools, roads, health centers, hospitals. We still have our people that need to be provided for. So when they, at the stroke of the legislative pen in Brussels, require us to do things that are harmful to ourselves, who then do we turn to assist us? And in a world where we continually are told that we must find our own way, we must pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. Well, how are you going to pull yourself up by your bootstrap when the EU keep removing your boots? No boots, no bootstrap, because every time we make an effort, and every time it appears that we've carved out a competitive advantage, whether it is financial services, citizenship by investment, or whichever avenue that we've applied our intellect to create a way for our people, they say, you know what, you're too successful at it. And therefore, it has to stop. Because somewhere there is a mentality that we, the people of this region, must remain mendicants. That when we want, we must come cap in hand to beg. Because if you're begging, the people that you're begging control you. And that seems to be the position, Mr. President. And that is why we are continually told that you must do as we say. I will end here by saying this. Recently, I saw an article about a fraud and a money laundering scandal at a bank called Danske Bank, which happened in this country which has all the country which has done so well in terms of No, in Europe. No. The bank is a Danish bank, but it happened, I'm thinking Slovenia, but it may not be Slovenia. It's one of those countries that has done so well with they digitized the entire country. No. Not Lithuania either. It'll come to me. Something with an S. But the point, no. It's in Europe, they've digitized the entire country. They are now the ones who are known globally for having digitized, and everything that you do in the country now, you have a card that allows you to access, to vote, and do all that. It will come to me. But when I look at this Danske Bank, and this Danske Bank, the press reports I saw said that some $230 billion was laundered through Danske Bank. Hear what I tell you? $230 billion in the heart of Europe. The last piece I saw said something about gold. They were exchanging bars of gold for the cash to try and clean it. I have never heard any OECD, FATF, EU say that they're blacklisting Denmark, they're blacklisting Danske. What the country? You'll find the country? Estonia. Estonia. I know there was an S in there, but I had it spelled wrong. $230 billion. Would that be, you know, Mr. President? Lord, if that money land on Nevis, Nevis will sink. Would that be? And not a thing. The bank just closed and they say, oh, some Russians who came in and whatever. No consequence. You think that could have happened in the Caribbean? And that is the hypocrisy that we see at work. And that, Mr. President, our people must keep in mind. I did say I would end there, and I will end there. I wish this bill safe passage to this honorable House.
Mr. President, I rise to lend my voice to the bill before this honorable House. I don't know how much support I can give or how much support I want to give, but the situation is the situation. There's the old adage that says, he who pays the piper calls the tune. So the piper has been paid, the tune has been called, and you know, Mr. President, we're not in the playing part. We got to dance the dance. And so, if the tune is playing, we got to find a way to dance. And to follow up on what the mover of the bill had been expressing and to continue in his tone, what we realize is every time we figure out the tune and we start to step in tune and we start to dance in tune, who call the tune, they don't seem to like it. So they say, play something different, Mr. President. And you see, Caribbean people, we got rhythm. We could dance good. So if the tune change a little bit, we catch it quick and we make adjustments. And it seems as though they realize, well, these people could adjust on the fly. You bring down something on them, they come in on the 28th of December during the Christmas season. Who does that? To make an amendment. So they say, you know, just changing the tune might not work. So let me put down some thumbtacks underneath where they're dancing. And let us make sure that we pull off their shoes so that they have to be dancing barefoot. And Mr. President, this is basically the kind of situation that we have happening. And what are we supposed to do as a small island state? When a big chunk of our tax revenue is now up in the balance. We heard the mover of the bill say that the returns are down by 30%. 30% already. And we haven't yet started to feel the full effect of what the legislation that we came to pass last year would do. And now what these additional amendments would bring on. And you see, Mr. President, these are the reasons why in these small islands we got to understand how it is to stick together. Because when the giants, when the EUs and the USAs and the other big countries, when they come to do their damage, they're not looking at Troy Libert and say, well, let's damage him. He liked to wear blue. They're not looking at somebody else and saying, well, you know, he wear a lot of red. Let's leave out him. It's affecting everybody, Mr. President. So when the government's revenue goes down, it affects all of us. It's already hard enough as it is right now to get money to do the things that we need to do. We got schools that need repairing. I'm in education, so I have to talk about schools. We have a lot of things that we need to get done. And here it is that, you know, we are making a little bit of money from the offshore financial services. And they're looking at us and they're saying, oh, you're doing well. I think that $12 million is too much for you. So we're going to put you on the blacklist. You know what? Make some amendments. Pass some new laws. Let us get access to your banks, to your bank accounts. Nothing in Nevis is supposed to be secret. Nobody is supposed to have any privacy. You want to open an account? You need to go to the bank with your whole life story. You have $50 and you want to go to the bank and bank it? You got to sign up 1,000 forms. But you're the same person from Nevis. Nevisian born. They don't know you in Miami. They don't know you in New York. And you head up to New York and you go in the bank and you say, you know what? You don't need to walk with your passport on you every day. You don't need 2 pieces of ID and then a mail to open an account. You got to do a little insurance on your car. They want proof of address. Mind you, you just gave them your ID, you know. And the ID says, Troy Libert, I live at Coal Hill. They say, no, we need proof of address. Okay? Bring me one of your bills or your bank statement or something of the sort. And these are coming from the rules that are being imposed upon us. Because what? We are small, Mr. President. So you see, every time we learn to dance the tune and we start getting comfortable and we start finding a way, and they realize, well, we thought the thing that we did the last time would have hampered them, but it look like they have adjusted. They don't like to see the adjustment. So whether it is offshore financial services, or whether it is CBI, or whatever the case may be, for some reason, any type of prosperity in small islands seems to be a bad thing. But Mr. President, we are resilient people. And we can't let these things hamper us. Our young people, they're doing excellent. Coming out of school, 9, 10, 12, 13 subjects, 5, 6, 7, 8 A-levels. And then they go to some of these universities in some of these big places, and they're the ones who are excelling. They're the top students. And we have to continue to support them, because they're going to be the future generations. They're going to be the ones who have to come up with the innovative things to help the island of Nevis to continue to move forward. In the meantime, we are here, and we are going to pass these amendments so that hopefully we don't move from the grey list to the blacklist or to the bad list, as the Premier has said. So I want to offer my little support for the bill so that we don't end up worse off than we already are when it comes to these things. And I want to say to everybody who's listening that we might not be in a position to call the tune, we might not be in a position to play the tune, but we are resilient people, and no matter what they throw at us, we will find a way to dance the tune. With those words, Mr. President, I wish this bill safe passage through this honorable House. May it please you.
Mr. President, I think the contribution of the Honorable Junior Minister has been quite important, and it looks as if we have unanimous support for the bill, both from government and the opposition. And so that being the case, Mr. President, I would move that the bill be read a second time.
Mr. President, I rise to second the motion.
The motion before this honorable House is that the bill, shortly entitled the Nevis Business Corporation Ordinance, be read a second time and pass. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
A bill to amend the Nevis Business Corporation Ordinance number 1 of 2017 and for matters related thereto or connected therewith.
The bill has been read a second time. Housing Committee?
Clause 2.
Question is that clause 2 do form part of the...
We need holds and owns, so we can acquire some deals with the new assets. No holds and owns as anything. It's a whole new asset you have to acquire. Huh?
That's I agree, sir, but that's what is the
Yeah, but why are they in brackets then? Why is the language in brackets? That's what I'm trying to figure out. So what do we take? So we remove the brackets. You say that's a language.
Question is that subsection 2 do form part of the bill with slight amendments where the bracket before holes is removed and after with is removed. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
Clause 1.
Question is that clause 1 do form part of the bill. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
Enacting clause.
Question is that the enacting clause do form part of the bill. Those in favor? Aye. Those against?
Ayes have it. Ayes have it.
House? Huh? The ayes have it.
Title.
The question is that title do form part of the bill. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. House resumes its sitting.
Mr. President, I'm happy to report that the bill shortly entitled Nevis Business Corporation Amendment Bill 2019 has gone through the committee stage with a minor amendment, the deletion of brackets. I have received from Her Honor the Deputy Governor General the necessary fiat to the extent that this bill could be considered a money bill, and that is already before the House. And I would ask, therefore, that the standing order, you do require the standing suspension of standing order 57?
57.
To allow this bill to be read a third time and passed.
Mr. President, I rise to support the motion before this Honorable House.
Question is that the bill shortly entitled the Nevis Business Corporation Ordinance number 1 of 20, Nevis Business Corporation Amendment Ordinance 2019 be read a third time and pass. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
A bill to amend the Nevis Business Corporation Ordinance number 1 of 2017 and for matters related thereto or connected therewith.
The bill has been read a third time and pass.
Mr. President, I rise hopefully for the last time for the day to lead the debate and propose a second reading, of the Nevis Limited Liability Company Amendment Bill 2019. I believe all that I've said a few minutes prior, Mr. President, would apply here, and so there is no value in repetition. What I will say is that we have come, as we did for the Nevis Business Corporation Ordinance, to amend further the Nevis Limited Liability Company Ordinance to ensure that we are in compliance with the requirements set for us as a small financial services jurisdiction. And so this ordinance was amended when we were here on the 28th of December 2018, and we come now in November to amend it further to meet this new deadline of December 31st, 2019, to avoid any unpleasantness, again, to which I have spoken at some length, at some length earlier. And so our principal amendment is to Section 96, Mr. President, and it recites shortly that the principal ordinance is amended in Section 96 by repealing subsection 5 and substituting the following. Notwithstanding the provision of subsections 1, 2, 3, and 4, the tax exemptions granted to all companies shall cease to take effect on the earlier of A, 30th June 2021, and B, if applicable, the date the company acquires, holds, owns, or deals with any new assets or engages in any new business activity that would give rise to assessable income in the absence of the exemption. So in truth, the amendment to this ordinance is identical to that hitherto proposed and passed for the Nevis Business Corporation Ordinance. I wish this amendment, therefore, safe passage for this Honourable House.
Mr. President, I rise to support the amendment ordinance. I think the mover of the bill has spoken eloquently about what we are trying to do. And of course, we as an administration, we continue to do what we have to do in these small jurisdictions. So I rise to support the amendment, and all of us on this side are in full support. And Mr. President, may it please you, I wish this amendment bill safe passage to this Honourable House.
That the bill. Huh?
Mr. President, the bill having, I think we must be given some credit for the alacrity with which we are passing the legislation. But the bill having been debated thoroughly, I believe that I would want to move that the bill be read a second time, Mr. President.
No, second time. Motion is that the bill, shortly entitled the Nevis Limited Liability Company Ordinance, be read a second time and pass. Those in not pass. Those in favor? Aye. The ayes have it.
Those against. A bill to amend the Nevis Limited Liability Company Ordinance number 2 of 2017 and for matters related thereto or connected therewith.
The bill has been read a second time. House in committee?
Clause 2.
The only amendment is to remove the brackets.
Question is that clause 2, where the brackets are to be removed, that is prior to word whole, the bracket before whole should be removed and the bracket after with should be removed. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
Clause 1.
Question is that clause 1 do form part of the bill. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
Enacting clause.
The enacting clause. Question is that the enacting clause do form part of the bill. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
Title.
Question is that the title do form part of the bill. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. House resumes its sitting.
Mr. President, I'm pleased to report that the bill, shortly entitled Nevis Limited Liability Company Amendment Bill 2019, has gone through committee stage and has gone through successfully with one minor amendment, the removal of the brackets in Section 2. Mr. President, we have seen and I've provided for the House the fiat from Her Honour, the Governor, Deputy Governor General, on the basis that this could be seen as a money bill, and therefore we have permission. In the circumstances, therefore, I would ask that Standing Order 57 be suspended and the bill be allowed to be read a third time and passed.
Mr. President, I rise to support the motion before this Honourable House.
Question is that the bill, shortly entitled the Nevis Limited Liability Company Ordinance, be read a third time. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
A bill to amend the Nevis Limited Liability Company Ordinance number 2 of 2017 and for matters related thereto or connected therewith.
The bill has been read a second time. Those in favor? Third time. Those in favor? And pass.
Adjournment.
Mr. President, I rise to seek your leave and ask for the adjournment of this honorable house. Sign and die.
Mr. President, I rise to second the motion.
Question is that this honorable house be adjourned, sign and die. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. House adjourned.